When was the last time life presented you with a problem or challenge you didn't expect? How well did you deal with it? Do you ever hear stories of people surviving tough situations and wonder how you would handle it if you were in their place? Today, we're going to talk about the art and science of resilience and offer some ideas about how you can strengthen your ability to deal with adversity. For this first show, I've asked my colleague Jacqueline if she'd interview me. Starting next week, I'll be inviting guests on board to share their stories and explore this topic from many angles. Jacqueline's been working with me for 5 years, and I'm delighted to have her here as my interviewer. So, Jacqueline, over to you.
Well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here interviewing. So, my first question is, you've been doing this for a while now. How did you get started with the resilience work?
Oh my gosh, let's see. Gosh, it's been about 25 years since I got started on this. So my background is in industrial and organizational psychology, which is psychology applied to the workplace. And I spent a few years as a professor and then went to work for a company called ODR that focused on the human side of organizational change. The company was founded by a guy named Daryl Conner, and I'm going to have him as a guest on the show in a few weeks. We'll talk a little bit more about the origin story and the work he's doing now. But what was really interesting to me is that work is such a central thing in so many people's lives, and organizational change has the potential to really disrupt people quite a bit. And so it was a great study ground for how we can teach people to learn to understand and manage their own responses to change, and to understand why some people deal more effectively with change than others. And so one of the first things I did there was to develop a model of resilience in conjunction with the team. And we developed a tool for personal feedback. We developed some training materials. And that's where it all got started. So I started Resilience Alliance in 2007 to give me an opportunity to focus more of my attention on the topic, both inside and out of the workplace. And the good news is that the journey never ends. There continue to be a lot of new areas for me to learn and explore.
So how do you define and think about resilience?
So the short answer is that resilience is the ability to maintain or quickly recover high levels of well-being in the face of challenges that life throws you. As you probably have noticed, it's the nature of the world to bring us challenges.
Yes.
We get everything from flat tires to health issues to changes at work to the dog getting sick to natural disasters to the loss of loved ones. And while these things may all look different on the surface, underneath there's some common ground to all of them in terms of how our brain responds to them, how, just sort of how we react. And the reason for that is that each of these things creates a gap between what we thought was going to happen, what our brain predicted was going to happen or wanted to happen, and what we actually see happening around us. So that gap between expectations and reality creates a sense of discomfort in us, and we're motivated to try to bring things back into balance. So in some situations, we can change reality to make it more like what we want. We can fix the tire, we can rebuild the house, we can clean up after the dog. In other situations, we need to adjust our expectations to the reality of the situation. If someone dies, for instance, we need to learn to live without them in our lives. We may recognize that it's time to look for a new job. And often it's a little of both. So do you remember about this time last year I broke my foot?
I do remember that.
Yeah, so that was a great example of a little of both. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't change the fact that my foot was broken. So I had to adjust to that reality and living in a boot and using crutches and all of that. But I also arranged reality to make it as much like my expectations as possible. I figured out how to get around. I went and spoke at a conference. I really tried to keep my life back as much normal as I could. And everything that we do to close that gap between expectations and reality takes energy. A combination of physical energy, in the case of my foot for sure, mental, as we think in new ways and learn new things, emotional energy as we deal with some of the sadness, grief, anger, joy, elation, some of the different emotions that come up as we encounter changes, and spiritual energy, which has to do with how we align with a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. So one of the things that we know is that some people do a better job of using their energy to deal with challenges than others. I'm sure you've probably noticed that as you go through life.
Yes, definitely.
So based on our own observations at Resilience Alliance and research that other people have done, we've started to look at what is it that differentiates the people who use their energy well from the people who don't do it so well. And we've identified 7 things that highly resilient people do effectively. We talk about these attributes or these characteristics as change muscles that people use to address the adversities they face. We'll focus a lot more attention on these in some upcoming shows, but today let me just give you an overview.
Great.
All right, so the first characteristic is being positive. Now, this sounds really obvious, but it's really the cornerstone of what we mean by resilience. Resilient people are able, even in the darkest situations, to see hope, opportunities, and possibilities. It doesn't mean that they deny what's going on around them, but they find a way to have a sense of meaning or purpose or a bright light somewhere. One of my role models around this is Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, about his experiences of being in a concentration camp and noticing sort of who was able to survive and hang in there from people who just gave up and died. And their attitude and their ability to find meaning in things, what turned out to be really important. The second thing is that resilient people are confident. They have a sense of positive self-worth. They recognize the value that they bring in unfamiliar and challenging situations. And that allows them to assert themselves, to step into situations rather than retreating from them and hiding from them and feeling like a victim. The third thing that resilient people do is that they set priorities. They're focused. So you can engage your energy with the positive characteristic and the confidence, but in the midst of ambiguity, you can end up dividing your energy in a lot of different directions. You may get pulled by various people, you may have various things that are most important, but what resilient people do is they're clear about their values and priorities so they can make wise decisions about where to invest their energy. Once they've done that, a lot of times unfamiliar situations require us to solve problems. And so there are a couple of things that are really helpful when we go to come up with creative solutions to unfamiliar situations. Resilient people are flexible. They can think of unusual ways to view and deal with challenges, and they can live with the ambiguity of not having the final answer right away. So they can sort of come up with plan A and plan B and plan C without having to decide immediately how they're going to approach it. The other part of being flexible is being able to draw on the resources that others can bring. So resilient people tend to have strong connections with other people and invest in building those connections, and they're comfortable reaching out to others for help. Many of us are good at giving help. Mm-hmm. Can you relate to that?
Yes.
But we're not always as good at reaching out for support, whether it's emotional support, practical assistance, ideas, etc. So when people are operating in a resilient way, they don't feel like they have to do it all themselves. The sixth thing that resilient people do is they apply structure and discipline. So they're organized and pay attention to the details, and they're able to make good plans, good structures. What that does is it helps them use their energy efficiently in dealing with challenges. So when we're in the midst of change, there are some things that may be predictable. And if we can make those things as automatic as possible so we don't have to spend energy on them, we free up our energy for the more unusual or challenging aspects of things. So that organization helps with time management. It helps us make sure we're getting our exercise in, all of those kinds of things that involve structure and discipline. This, by the way, is not my strongest characteristic.
It's not mine either, and I love the way that you just described it. I think that's the best description I've heard of that characteristic.
Good. And then the final thing, so we've engaged our energy by being positive and confident. We've focused our attention on what's most important. We've opened up possibilities with the flexible characteristic. We've reached out to other people. We've built good plans. All of that's academic if we don't act. And so resilient people are able to get out of their comfort zone, take some risks, try some stuff, engage with the world rather than trying to avoid risk and wait until everything's certain before they act. So some of the most resilient people I know actually deliberately go out and seek challenging experiences and ways, things that will shake them up so that they can get that new, fresh energy into their world. So that's kind of the overview of the resilience characteristics.
Well, that's great. And for a lot of people, that brings up the question of, is resilience something people are born with, or can it be developed?
So, nature, nurture.
Right.
I'd say the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You probably saw that coming,
Yep.
right? So, there's no question that people come with predispositions. You know that some people just come out of the box with more positive ways of looking at the world. They're more optimistic. Other people just start with a more pessimistic view, and that's very clear. However, while we used to focus our attention on those things that were fixed, those individual differences that were kind of set in people, there's a lot more attention now on how we can change our brains. Neuroplasticity is a term that scientists use to describe the development of new connections in the brain based on our experience. And so what we know is that the experiences that surround people, the role models they have about how you deal with situations, the things they practice over time to strengthen their ability to look at the positive, for instance, or to come up with creative possibilities. All of those things, I think, can be developed. So I actually use the metaphor of change muscles very consciously because I think that we can develop these muscles very much like we develop our physical muscles. So you know that if you want to get more upper body strength, you don't just go to one class and you're done. You have to every day lift some weights or do some push-ups or whatever it is to build that upper body strength. And it's sort of small repetitions over time that build up the muscles. This is true for the resilience characteristics as well. So for instance, if you wanted to build your flexible muscle, you might develop a practice of noticing when you use the phrase yes, but, as opposed to yes, and. Those are two very different, it's a subtlety, but those are two very different ways of viewing a situation. Yes, but sort of is a right, wrong, yes, no, black, white, binary way of viewing things. Yes, and says, okay, this can be true and that can be true. And it opens up possibilities and allows you to think of maybe more ways of approaching things. Then when you look at, for instance, the positive characteristic, in my own life, my husband and I have worked on building our positivity muscles by taking time to share something we're thankful for about the day when we sit down to dinner. Some days we've got a roof over our heads and we've got food in front of us. But other days we really have much more to be thankful for. But little by little, building those new connections in our brains makes it easier for us to spot the positive because we've built up that gratitude practice. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested in more information about how to build any of these characteristics, I wrote a book called Managing Change with Personal Resilience that talks about each of the characteristics with additional ideas about how to develop them. And I would recommend that you take a look at some of the exercises that are in there.
That's a great book. It's a quick, easy read with lots of simple, accessible explanations and exercises. So I'm a fan. So talking about people developing their resilience, what have you seen when people find it hard, if they're having a difficult time developing their resilience, what can they do?
Well, so humans are creatures of habit. And one of the reasons it can be hard to develop resilience characteristics is that the habits of mind that we already have are pretty well set by the time we're, 10 or 12 years old. We often have so much going on in our heads that we fall back into these familiar patterns, especially when we're stressed, especially when crazy things are going on. So it's really important to use the downtime, to use sort of the in-between times or the small challenges as a way to start to build those resilience muscles. So one of the things I recommend is that people figure out how to use everyday challenges as resilience practice. You get stuck in traffic, you get the flat tire. Instead of saying, oh, darn it, you go, oh, resilience practice, great. The other thing that I think is important is to figure out how to build a habit of doing whatever your strengthening exercises are. Mm-hmm. And so if you pick something you want to do regularly, like let's say it's that positive thing or that flexible thing. So I've got a little mnemonic that I use to help people think about building habits, and it's clock it, stack it, or track it. So when you clock it, what that's about is picking a time every day to do that thing. So for me, I have my little fitness bracelet and it wakes me up at 6 o'clock in the morning so that I can do my journaling and a little bit of meditation time, which are some of the habits I've been trying to build. So I pick a time and I do it at that time. The stack it piece suggests that you take something that you already regularly do every day, whether it's making your coffee in the morning or brushing your teeth or whatever it is, and tag a habit onto that. So now after you do that thing, then you add on the new thing that you want to do. So you've got a trigger for it. Then track it is about the human love of being successful at things. So getting a calendar and putting a check mark or a gold star on it every time you do your activity helps you see your progress and appreciate how well you've done at doing the habit, or nudge yourself when you haven't done it for a few days to remind you to sort of get back into the swing of it. So I'm curious, have you built any habits that way for yourself?
Well, I have. I was just thinking about that. I've got this exercise that it's just a quick, easy, simple exercise that I do for lateral hip strength that I have rolled into brushing my teeth. So while I'm brushing my teeth, I'm doing this exercise, and it's a way to get both of those things in at the same time without having to take extra time out of my day to exercise. So
very cool. So in future broadcasts, we'll continue to share ideas and strategies for building their resilience. I'll give you a sneak preview, though. One of them is to work with a partner or coach and find somebody who can help you focus and stay accountable and come up with ideas for trying things. So Jacqueline, I know you do some coaching. Do you have a story about how you helped someone work to develop their own resilience?
Sure. Yeah, I actually have a very recent story. I had a client that I was working with, and we were focusing on her resilience and had been working together for a little while on it. So it's kind of there's two levels of the resilience characteristics and some of these exercises coming into play, because she had already been working on some of her her characteristics and learning how to exercise those change muscles. She hit a rough patch with her business. She's a business owner, and she had just had a time where everything just seemed to run dry, but all these people around her who were in the same business were really busy, and she felt like she got very discouraged and hopeless and felt like there was something she was doing wrong. And we were able to sit down, and because she'd been doing some work on her change muscles already, she was able to really easily pull on her flexible thoughts, because that's where she was getting stuck, was what she could do differently to bring in business. And we did my favorite exercise, which is the crazy ideas, where you just get somebody to think outside of their comfort zone about what they can do. And I kicked her off with thinking about the idea of hiring a skywriter to put her name and phone number in the sky, and so that's where you start with crazy ideas, is you go all the way out, and then slowly you work your way back to things that are actually realistic for you. But it worked really well for her, and lo and behold, within the next month her business picked back up, and she was she was able to feel good about herself and not get totally down in the dumps in the midst of all of it, because she was exercising those change muscles. So
it sounds like that had some immediate results for her. Do you think that she learned a skill? Like, was this muscle stronger so that the next time she would encounter a challenge, she would know how to use that?
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely think that was the case.
Good.
So the next thing that you mentioned your first book, Managing Change with Personal Resilience, and you are now working on a new book. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, I can. Yes, I'm really excited about this. I disappeared for a couple of weeks before Christmas this year and did a bunch of writing on this book. Didn't get it done, but I am working now on getting it finished. And I am writing it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's been more than 10 years since the last book came out. That's a long darn time. Mm-hmm. And I've learned a lot since then, both from my own work with clients, from my colleagues at Resilience Alliance, and from reading a lot of interesting new research, things about the brain, things about the nervous system, things about health and well-being. So there's just a ton of new influences on my thinking. Secondly, the first book was focused on resilience in the midst of organizational change. And while that's a very important setting for resilience, it made the book somewhat limited in terms of people who don't have that as their primary arena. So, for instance, people who are graduating from high school or college and learning to deal with all the new changes in their world.
Right.
Or people who are getting older, who are retired and have different kinds of challenges that come with aging. I've become a lot more interested in resilience in other parts of life. So one of the questions I want to answer in this book is, how do we help people sustain their well-being as they go through some of these other challenges, aging, being a caregiver for a child or an adult with special needs, dealing with natural disasters, and how do we advise parents who want to raise resilient children, which is a tremendously important attribute for kids to have as they grow up and deal with the unexpected in the world.
Yes.
So I'm writing this book for everyone from teenagers to seniors and weaving in some of the areas that have influenced my thinking over time. One of the fun things about writing a book is you get to put in whatever you want. And so I have some things that I love, like I'm trained as a massage therapist. I don't practice right now, but that got me thinking about body and mind And I have studied self-defense as a way of understanding how to deal with some of the more extreme challenges one might face. I love music. I love sailboat racing. I love traveling as a way of stretching my brain. And so you'll hear stories from all of that in the book. So in addition to the resilience muscles we talked about earlier, there are also sections on building, sustaining, and replenishing your energy, your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy. There are some strategies for building a resilience workout and for using everyday challenges, as I talked about earlier, for building your resilience muscles. And I also have created something called an adversity map. So we talked about how there's common ground underlying many of the different sources of adversity we face, whether they're things that we chose to do, even though they were hard, like running a marathon, or things that nature throws at us, like getting older or a hurricane, or things that other people do, people who are deciding that there are going to be layoffs in the organization, or even at the extreme, people doing harm, kidnappings and things like that. So the adversity map sort of shows how all of those things are part of one terrain and helps people evaluate the nature of the challenges they're facing so that they can start to figure out the best strategy for dealing with them. Now, I don't have much of it completely finished, but I did finish one chapter called, Minimizing Adversity. And it's some guidance on how you avoid adversity in the first place so you don't have to use so much energy dealing with it. And that chapter is available on my website for you to download for free. So if you would go to resiliencealliance.com/free chapter, resiliencealliance.com/free chapter, you can download it for yourself and get a little teaser of what the rest of the book is going to be like. So I thank you very much for these questions, Jacqueline. I think we're about at the end of our time, and I appreciate all of you who have been listening to the show today, either live or on demand on the Blog Talk Radio, Resilience-Radio page. I encourage you to go out and try some of the strategies we talked about for building your resilience muscles, and I hope you'll let me know how it goes. You can actually post a comment on the page, or you can send a note to me at linda@resiliencealliance.com. Would love to hear from you, and I'll be sharing some of the stories that I hear on future shows. Please join us next week as we welcome guest Cindy Coney, Ambassador of Hope and Resiliency for those living with chronic illnesses. We'll talk about her own experience with lupus and the work that she does to encourage and help others as an author, speaker, teacher, and all-around energetic lady. That's it for today's broadcast, and we'll see you next week on Resilience Radio.